The complete history of the Sumerians and early Mesopotamia. From the first farmers to the rise of cities, circa 700 to 3500 BC. Long before written history appeared, long before the names of kings were carved into stone and gods were given temples and priesthoods, one of the most important regions in human history began to take shape between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This land, later known as Mesopotamia, became the birthplace of the first cities, the first laws, the first writing system, and the first states. It was here that humanity made a decisive transition from simple agricultural communities to complex civilization. The natural environment of Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia was a land of extremes and challenges. Unlike Egypt, with its predictable flooding of the Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates were unstable and dangerous. Their floods were sudden and often destructive. Periods of drought were followed by violent inundations that destroyed crops and settlements. Yet these same rivers made the land exceptionally fertile, leaving behind rich layers of silt. To survive in such conditions, people were forced to learn how to control water. This led to the creation of the first irrigation systems, canals, dams, and reservoirs. Managing them required collective effort, long-term planning, and coordination. These demands gradually gave rise to organized authority and social hierarchy. The first agricultural settlements, 700 to 5000 BC. By the 7th millennium BC, the first stable agricultural settlements began to appear in southern Mesopotamia. People cultivated barley and wheat, domesticated sheep and goats, and built houses from mud brick. These communities were no longer nomadic. They settled permanently and developed lasting infrastructure. Archaeologists refer to this period as the Ubaid culture. Settlements steadily grew, houses became larger, and signs of social inequality emerged. Some families possessed larger homes and greater grain reserves, while others had fewer resources. This indicates the emergence of an early elite. Religious buildings acquired special importance. Temples became centers not only of spiritual life, but also of economic organization. Food supplies were stored there, labor was distributed, and resources were recorded. Priests functioned as administrators who governed the community in the name of the gods. The temple as the center of society. In early Mesopotamia, there was no separation between religion and power. The temple was the heart of the settlement. It was believed that land, harvests, and people themselves belonged to the gods, while priests merely managed divine property. Religious rituals were inseparable from daily life. Agricultural success, protection from floods, and relief from disease all depended on divine favor. As a result, priests wielded enormous influence, and religion became the foundation of social stability. Urbanization and the birth of Sumerian civilization, 5000 to 3500 BC. Over time, small settlements transformed into cities. This process is known as the urban revolution. A new culture emerged, the Sumerians. They became the first people in history to create true cities. Cities such as Eridu, Ur, Lagash, and especially Uruk developed into major population centers. Uruk is considered the first true metropolis of the ancient world. At its height, it may have housed up to 50,000 inhabitants, an unprecedented number for the time. Urban life demanded new forms of organization, centralized administration, division of labor, resource accounting, protection from external threats. It was under these conditions that the greatest Sumerian invention appeared, writing. The invention of writing. The earliest forms of writing were purely practical. Clay tokens were used to track grain, livestock, and goods. Eventually, symbols were pressed directly onto clay tablets. These early signs were pictographic representations of objects. Gradually, the images became simplified and evolved into cuneiform, a system of wedge-shaped signs created using a sharpened reed stylus. By the end of the 4th millennium BC, writing was used not only for economic records, but also for religion, law, and literature. Writing allowed knowledge to be fixed in permanent form, transmitted across generations, and used to govern complex societies. History, in the true sense of the word, began here. Sumerian worldview and religion. The Sumerian world was filled with gods. These deities were believed to be powerful, unpredictable, and often dangerous. Each city had its own patron god, honored in a monumental temple complex known as a ziggurat. Among the most important gods were Anu, god of the sky; Enlil, god of air and authority; Enki, god of wisdom and creation; Inanna, goddess of love, fertility, and war. According to Sumerian mythology, humans were created to serve the gods. The afterlife was imagined as bleak and joyless, so the primary goal of human existence was to earn divine favor during one's lifetime. Formation of power and the institution of kingship. As cities grew and social life became more complex, the religious authority of priests was gradually complemented and later partially replaced by secular power. This gave rise to the institution of kingship. The Sumerian ruler held the title Lugal, which meant big man. He was not considered a god, but acted as the chosen one of the gods, their representative on earth. The king was responsible for protecting the city, maintaining order, building temples, walls, and irrigation structures. He led the army, administered justice, and ensured the laws were observed. The king's power had a sacred character, but was limited by the will of the gods and traditions. At the same time, other forms of governance existed. In some cities, councils of elders and popular assemblies played an important role, especially in the early period. This indicates that the political system of the Sumerians was complex and multi-layered. Laws and concepts of justice. The Sumerians were among the first to attempt to formalize the concept of law. Although later law codes, such as the Code of Hammurabi, have survived, their roots lie in the Sumerian tradition. Laws regulated property relations, marriages, inheritance, trade, and punishments for crimes. They were based on the principle of retribution, but also took into account a person's social status. Freedom, slavery, and debt, all were clearly legally defined. Law was considered a gift from the gods, and its violation was seen as a sin against cosmic order. Court decisions were accompanied by oaths and religious rituals. Wars and rivalries between city-states. The Sumerian civilization was never a single state. It was a network of independent city-states, constantly competing with each other. Causes of conflicts included fertile lands, access to water, trade routes, and political influence. Archaeological finds testify to frequent wars. Cities were surrounded by massive walls, and weapons such as spears, axes, and bows were developed. The first military chariots, drawn by donkeys, also appeared. One of the earliest documented conflicts was the war between the cities of Lagash and Umma. This conflict lasted decades and was described in detail in cuneiform sources, making it one of the first known examples of written military history. Economy and trade. Southern Mesopotamia suffered from a severe shortage of natural resources. There was almost no stone, metals, or wood. This made trade vitally important. Sumerian merchants conducted trade over great distances, exchanging grain, textiles, and crafts for copper from the Oman Peninsula, wood from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from areas of modern Afghanistan, silver and gold from Asia Minor. Trade promoted cultural exchange and strengthened economic ties between regions. Contracts, promissory notes, and commercial agreements were recorded on clay tablets. Social structure of Sumerian society. Sumerian society was strictly hierarchical. At the top were the king and priests. Below them were officials, scribes, merchants, and craftsmen. The majority of the population consisted of farmers, working the fields and maintaining irrigation systems. At the bottom were slaves. Slavery existed but was not widespread. Slaves could be prisoners of war, debtors, or people who sold themselves due to poverty. In some cases, they had limited rights and could buy their freedom. The role of women in Sumerian society. Compared to later civilizations, women in Sumer had a relatively high status. They could own property, conduct trade, serve as priestesses, and even manage temple estates. There are known names of women scribes and poets. The most famous is Enheduanna, daughter of Sargon of Akkad, a high priestess and author of religious hymns. She is the first known author in human history whose name is reliably recorded. Nevertheless, political and military power remained predominantly in the hands of men. Education and the role of scribes. Writing was the key to power and social advancement. Education and writing took place in special schools called adubba, meaning house of tablets. Future scribes studied cuneiform, mathematics, geometry, laws, and religious texts. Education was demanding and required discipline. Scribes were respected and could hold high positions at the court and in temples. It is thanks to their work that thousands of texts have survived, revealing the inner world of Sumerian civilization, mythology, and literature. The Sumerians created a rich mythological tradition. Their myths explain the origins of the world, gods, and humans. They reflected fears, hopes, and beliefs about fate. The most famous literary work is the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story of a king seeking immortality. This text addresses universal themes of life, death, friendship, and the meaning of existence, remaining relevant thousands of years later. Crises, climate, and the decline of Sumerian cities. By the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, Sumerian civilization faced a series of serious problems. Climate changes led to more frequent droughts, and centuries of intensive agriculture caused soil salinization. Crop yields decreased, food resources were depleted, and urban populations continued to grow. The irrigation system, once the foundation of prosperity, now required constant maintenance and coordination. The weakening of central authority led to the destruction of canals, further worsening the crisis. Economic instability undermined social balance and intensified internal conflicts. External threats and invasions. Neighboring peoples took advantage of the weakened Sumerian cities. Nomadic tribes increased pressure from the north and east, while Semitic peoples became more active from the west. Gradually, the Sumerians lost the military superiority that had previously ensured the safety of their cities. A turning point was the rise of Akkad. Sargon of Akkad, a talented military leader and administrator, managed to subdue the Sumerian cities and create the first territorial state in history, the Akkadian Empire. The Akkadian Empire and cultural synthesis. The conquest of the Sumerians did not mean the disappearance of their culture. On the contrary, the Akkadians adopted Sumerian writing, religion, administrative systems, and art. A unique cultural synthesis emerged. Sumerian became the language of religion and science, while Akkadian was the language of everyday communication and governance. This bilingualism persisted for centuries and had a profound impact on the development of Mesopotamia as a whole. Many texts were copied in both languages, helping preserve Sumerian heritage even after the Sumerians ceased to exist as a distinct people. The fall of Akkad and temporary revival. After the deaths of Sargon and his successors, the Akkadian Empire faced internal rebellions, economic crises, and invasions by the mountain-dwelling Gutians. The state collapsed, and some Sumerian cities regained independence. This period is known as the Sumerian Renaissance, associated primarily with the 3rd dynasty of Uruk. The kings of Uruk restored order, centralized administration, and strengthened the economy. New law codes were created, the bureaucratic system improved, and temples and canals were rebuilt. The end of the Sumerian era. Around 2000 BCE, Sumerian civilization finally lost political independence. Invasions by the Amorites, ongoing climate problems, and internal conflicts led to the fall of the last Sumerian city-states. The Sumerian language gradually ceased to be used in daily life, but continued to be employed in religious and scholarly texts, similar to Latin in medieval Europe. The cultural influence of the Sumerians persisted for many centuries. The legacy of the Sumerians. The significance of Sumerian civilization cannot be overstated. The Sumerians laid the foundations of what we today call civilization. They created the first cities, the first writing system, the first laws, and the first administrative systems. Their achievements include the development of irrigation and agriculture, the invention of the wheel and plow, the creation of cuneiform writing, the formation of literature and mythology, the foundations of mathematics and astronomy. Ideas born in Mesopotamia were inherited by the Babylonians, Assyrians, and other peoples of the ancient Near East, and through them influenced the entire subsequent history of humanity. The Sumerians did not leave behind monumental structures comparable to the Egyptian pyramids, but they left something far more valuable, an intellectual and cultural legacy. Their cities became ruins, buried under the sands, but the ideas that arose between the Tigris and Euphrates continue to live. In clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform, humanity first became self-aware, recorded its experience, and passed it on to future generations. This is where history, in its truest sense, began. Please tell us in the comments what country and city you're watching from. What moments do you like best?